Chosen one, anchor your spirit to what I am about to say right now. That restless feeling you cannot shake, the one that has been sitting in the back of your mind for the last 72 hours. This message is the answer to it. God is not trying to get your attention anymore. He has it. And what he is about to do is not gentle. It is not subtle. It is an arrest. It all shifts in the next 24 hours. The confusion, the stagnation, the silence. But hear me clearly. This is not shifting because of coincidence. It is shifting because of what you have been carrying in secret. The prayers, the loyalty you maintained when everything in you wanted to walk away. Think back to that moment this week when you almost broke, when you almost said what you felt, when you almost gave them a piece of your mind, when you almost went back to what God told you to leave. You pulled back. You went silent. You stayed. You did not know it then. But that moment of restraint was not weakness. That was the turning point. That was the moment heaven moved on your behalf. You did not stumble onto this message. The algorithm did not surface this for you. God did. This is a divine appointment that was written before the foundations of the earth were laid. You are not early. You are not late. You are exactly on time for what is about to be revealed. If that landed somewhere real in your spirit, press the like button right now. Not for a channel. That like is your digital yes, a declaration that you did not arrive here by accident and you are not leaving the same way you came. And in the comments, type I receive this divine appointment, not as a passing acknowledgement, as the first act of alignment with what heaven just confirmed over your life. Stay until the very last second of this message, because in the next few minutes I am going to hand you the spiritual verdict that names what is being arrested in your life right now. I am going to walk you through the exact warning God has been releasing in your spirit this week, so you can finally understand what that unease has been pointing to. And at the end, I am going to give you a declaration that seals the arrest warrant and closes the door on everything that has had access to your peace, your purpose, and your promise. Do not click away. Your future self is on the other side of this message. If you leave now, you leave before the verdict is read, and this is not a verdict you want to miss. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has not just been quiet. It has been charged like something is about to break open, but has not yet, like standing in the doorway of a room where something significant just happened, and the air is still holding the weight of it. Maybe you have been moving through your days on the outside, but somewhere on the inside something feels frozen. Maybe you woke up at 3 in the morning this week, and your mind went immediately to a situation you thought you had surrendered, and you lay there in the dark wondering if God had forgotten. Or maybe you have been sitting with a decision that should feel clear, but every time you try to move forward, something in your chest locks up, and you do not know if that is fear or if that is God saying stop. You feel suspended, like you are standing between two worlds, the one you are leaving and the one you have been promised. And in that in-between space, the enemy has started whispering a very specific lie. He is telling you that the reason everything feels stalled is because you missed your moment. He is replaying a specific scene in your memory. That moment when you did not speak up. That moment when you walked away from the assignment because it cost too much. That moment when you chose silence, and now you are wondering if your silence was surrender. The accuser is telling you that because of that moment you have delayed your own breakthrough, that God is waiting on you to do something you already failed to do. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this season. Nahum 10:09 says, "What do you conspire against the Lord? He will make an utter end of it. Affliction shall not rise up the second time." Sit with that promise. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. The enemy is working overtime to convince you that you are back at the beginning, that because of what you did or did not do, you have been sent back to the starting line, and this is just another lap around the same wilderness. That is a deception. You are not in a cycle. you are in a conclusion. Type, I am not in a cycle. I am in a conclusion in the comments right now. Not as a motivational phrase, as a prophetic declaration over the exact season you are standing in. Let those words do what they were created to do when they leave your fingertips and enter the atmosphere. And the arrest that is coming is not an arrest of your destiny. It is an arrest of everything that has been standing between you and it. The heaviness you feel right now is not the weight of punishment. It is the weight of finality. It is the pressure that builds in the atmosphere right before something breaks. Right before something that has been locked for years is suddenly opened. Right before the thing that has been chasing you is suddenly stopped in its tracks. That moment when you stayed silent instead of reacting was not a defeat. That moment when you walked away instead of engaging was not a retreat. That was a divine strategy, and God is about to show you exactly what it purchased. There are moments in life when God does not whisper, He arrests, not with chains, not with punishment, but with a divine interruption so precise, so personal, that everything you thought you were building suddenly goes still. And if you are watching this right now, something in your spirit already knows. This is one of those moments. Type, I trust the surgery in the comments, because that is exactly what this is. Heaven is not breaking what was working. Heaven is correcting what was set wrong the first time, and a person who trusts a surgeon does not fight the procedure. They surrender to the precision of hands that can see what they cannot. Some messages do not just inform, they activate. Now stay with me, because what I am about to walk you through is not theory. This is the anatomy of divine intervention. And most people who experience it do not understand what is happening until it is already over. The reason so many chosen people feel stuck right now is not because God has forgotten them. It is because they have misread the silence. They have interpreted the pause as punishment. They have looked at what is being taken, the relationship, the opportunity, the momentum, and concluded that something went wrong. But here is what C.S. Lewis understood, that most modern voices refuse to say. God is not interested in your comfort. He is interested in your completion. And completion requires a kind of breaking that comfort will never produce. Comfort is a kind of anesthesia. It numbs the edges of longing and softens the sharp call of transformation until you no longer feel its edges at all. And so God, who loves you too fiercely to allow you to sleepwalk through your destiny, sometimes reaches into the middle of what felt settled, what felt safe, what felt like yours, and He stops it. He halts the momentum. He silences the noise. Not because your story is over, but because the chapter you were writing was not the chapter He ordained. And in the abrupt stillness that follows, in that breathless, disorienting, sacred pause, that is where the real work begins. Think about this. When a bone is set incorrectly after a fracture, a surgeon does not simply encourage it to heal better. He breaks it again at the point of original injury, not out of cruelty, but because a bone that heals in the wrong position will limit movement for the rest of your life. And God, who sees the full architecture of your destiny, will sometimes re-break what healed wrong, not because He is harsh, but because He is precise. The arrest you are experiencing right now may not be a sign that you failed. It may be the sign that He finally trusts you enough to fix what was set wrong the first time. That surgical image is not accidental. A surgeon who re-breaks a misaligned bone does so only when the patient is ready to endure it, only when the body is strong enough to survive the correction and rebuild properly from the wound. There is a strange, stunning mercy embedded in that truth. It means that the pain you are in right now is not evidence of God's distance. It may be evidence of His proximity. It may mean that He has assessed your capacity, looked at the full landscape of what you carry, and determined that you are finally strong enough, not to avoid the re-breaking, but to survive it and come out on the other side, moving in ways you never could before. What feels like devastation is actually surgical precision. What feels like loss is actually the removal of a limitation. You could not see clearly enough to release on your own. But here is where it goes deeper. And this is the part most people skip past, because it requires a level of honesty that is deeply uncomfortable. The thing that was set wrong is not always what the enemy did to you. Sometimes it is what you chose in the middle of your pain. When Elijah ran from Jezebel after the fire fell on Mount Carmel, he did not run because he was weak. He ran because he was exhausted. He had just experienced one of the greatest spiritual victories in the history of Israel. And in the very next moment, a single threat from one woman sent him under a juniper tree, asking God to take his life. And what did God do? He did not rebuke him. He fed him. He let him sleep. He sent an angel twice. But then, and this is critical, he asked him a question that cut through everything. What are you doing here, Elijah? Not what happened to you. Not who hurt you. What are you doing here? Because the issue was not the threat from Jezebel. The issue was that Elijah had built his identity on the fire coming down, and when the fire did not stop the persecution, he did not know who he was without the visible miracle. And God was arresting that misplacement before it became a permanent limp in his destiny. Sit with that for a moment. God's question to Elijah was not a reprimand. It was an excavation. It was God reaching past the surface of the exhaustion, past the understandable fear, past the legitimate grief, and going directly to the root. What are you doing here? Meaning this cave, this hiding place, this posture of defeat, it does not belong to your identity. You are not a man of the cave. You are a man of the mountain. You are a man of fire and wind and the still small voice. How did you end up here? And more importantly, why are you staying? Because the question was not just geographical. It was prophetic. It was God refusing to allow Elijah to establish a permanent residence in the lowest point of his journey. You may have done the same thing. You may have built your identity on what God did through you, instead of who God made you to be, and now that the visible fire has gone quiet, you do not know who you are in the silence. That is the hidden fracture. That is what the arrest is targeting. There is a profound difference between a calling and an identity, and yet so many people collapse the two until they are indistinguishable. When the calling produces fruit, when the ministry grows, when the gift is celebrated, when the prayers are visibly answered, and the results are undeniable, it is dangerously easy to begin locating your sense of self inside the outcome, rather than inside your relationship with the one who called you. And so when the outcomes shift, when the visible manifestation goes quiet, when the season turns and the fruit stops appearing on the branches you are certain were permanently yours, something inside you panics, because you have mistaken the gift for the giver. You have mistaken the evidence of God for God himself. And that confusion, left uncorrected, will hollow out your spiritual life from the inside, leaving you performing for an audience when you were called to a presence. Now, once you understand that, you are ready for this. There is a pattern in Scripture that almost no one talks about because it is deeply counterintuitive. Every person God used at the highest level was not just tested. They were specifically tested in the area of their calling. Moses, called to lead, was placed in a position of total powerlessness for 40 years. David, anointed as king, was hunted like a criminal for nearly a decade. Paul, appointed as the apostle to the nations, spent years in chains. Joseph, whose entire assignment was about divine elevation, spent more time in pits and prisons than in palaces. The pattern is not coincidental. The pattern is intentional because God does not give authority to people who have not been proven in the absence of it. He does not release influence to those who have not survived the silence of invisibility. The arrest you are in right now may be the very prerequisite for the assignment God has written over your life before you were born. Type "strip everything that gets in the way of His glory" in the comments. That is what the wilderness did for Moses. That is what the cave did for Elijah. That is what the pit did for Joseph. And that is what this season is doing for you. Type it as a declaration of alignment with the process that is already underway. Let that pattern breathe in your spirit for a moment. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, not as a punishment for the Egyptian he struck down in a moment of misguided zeal, but as a formation, because the man who would stand before Pharaoh and part the Red Sea could not be the same man who thought he could liberate Israel through his own strength, his own royal status, his own act of violence. That man had to be stripped. He had to become a shepherd in the desert, tending flocks on the backside of nowhere, unknown and unmemorable by every earthly measure, so that when God finally spoke from the burning bush, Moses would have nothing left to stand on except God himself. The wilderness did not weaken Moses. The wilderness dismantled everything in Moses that would have gotten in the way of God's glory, being the only thing visible in the deliverance. And David, beloved, anointed, celebrated after Goliath, spent years living in caves, fleeing a king who had once celebrated him. He wrote psalms in the dark. He wept in places no one would see. He cried out to a God who seemed distant, while enemies surrounded him on every side. And in those years of hiding, something was being built in David that the throne could never have produced, a heart after God that had been forged not in triumph, but in anguish. The Psalms we return to in our own darkest moments were written in David's darkest moments. The very seasons of his greatest pain became the legacy of his greatest intimacy with God. And the authority he carried when he finally sat on the throne was not the authority of a man who had never suffered. It was the authority of a man who had suffered completely and discovered that God was sufficient in every layer of it. Stay with me, because what is coming next is the insight that breaks the cycle, and it is the one thing most people avoid. Type 444 in the comments right now. 4 is the number of foundation, of the hidden work that holds everything visible in place. Let that number be your declaration that you understand the hidden place is not exile. It is the foundation being laid for something that will not fall when the storms come. Here is what almost no one is willing to say out loud. Some of what has been arrested in your life needed to be arrested. Not because it was sinful, but because it was premature. There is such a thing as good fruit produced out of season. There is such a thing as a right thing at the wrong time, that if it had continued, would have produced a version of your destiny that looked right on the outside, but was hollow at the root. God is not only interested in what you build, He is interested in what you build from. Because a ministry built from unhealed ambition will eventually collapse under its own unresolved wounds. A relationship entered from a place of spiritual desperation will mirror the emptiness it was meant to fill. A calling walked out before the character has been formed will produce influence without integrity, and influence without integrity is one of the most dangerous things a person can carry. Consider a tree planted in shallow soil. For a season, it may grow quickly. Its branches spread wide. Its leaves catch the attention of every passerby. Its fruit appears early and in abundance. But when the storm comes, and storms always come, the root system cannot hold what the visible growth has promised, and it falls, not because it was the wrong tree, not because it lacked potential, but because the soil beneath it was never deep enough to sustain what was asked of it. God is a long-game gardener. He is not impressed by early shoots. He is interested in root systems that can withstand generations of storms, root systems that go deep enough to drink from underground rivers when the surface goes completely dry. And sometimes the most loving thing He can do for a life that is growing too fast in too shallow soil is to stop the visible growth entirely and redirect all the energy downward into the hidden place, into the dark, unseen, unglamorous work of going deeper rather than growing taller. God arrested it not because He did not trust your gifting. He arrested it because He is building something that has to last beyond your moment. And what lasts requires a foundation that can only be laid in the hidden place. Type "build something that lasts beyond my moment" in the comments. Not as ambition. As surrender, you are not building it. He is. Your part is to stop pulling the roots back up every time the visible growth goes quiet, and trust that what is happening underground is the real work, the hidden place. That phrase deserves its own meditation, because in a culture that celebrates visibility, the hidden place feels like exile. It feels like irrelevance. It feels like God has moved on and left you in a room where no one is watching and nothing is happening. But the hidden place is not where God abandons the work. The hidden place is where God does the work that cannot be done in public. It is the place where the identity questions get settled without an audience to perform for. It is where the ambition gets examined and refined and surrendered until it is no longer your engine but his instrument. It is where the wounds that were driving the calling get finally fully healed, so that the calling is no longer contaminated by what it was trying to compensate for. The hidden place is not the waiting room before your assignment. For many people, the hidden place is the assignment, the place where the most essential, most eternal, most irreplaceable work of your life is being done in silence. And this brings us to the real turning point, the one most people are not ready for. The invitation inside the arrest is not to pray your way back to where you were. The invitation is to let go of where you were completely, because where you were was not where you were going. It was where you were formed, and you have confused the forming place with the destination. You have looked back at what was taken and called it your promise, when God was actually calling it your preparation. The Israelites in the wilderness did not lose Egypt. They were liberated from it. But they spent 40 years asking to go back, because the familiar captivity felt safer than the unfamiliar promise. And God, in his mercy, would not let them return, not because he was cruel, but because he could see what they could not. That Egypt had no room for what they were about to become. Egypt is one of the most penetrating images in all of Scripture for the human experience of attachment to limitation. Here were a people who had been enslaved, genuinely, brutally, generationally enslaved. And yet when the wilderness got difficult, when the manna felt monotonous, when the destination felt impossibly distant, what they longed for was not just food. What they longed for was the familiar architecture of a life they knew how to survive, even if that life was one of chains. Because chains, if you have worn them long enough, stop feeling like chains and start feeling like structure. They stop feeling like oppression and start feeling like orientation. You know where you stand in them. You know what is expected of you. And the terrifying openness of freedom, the unmapped, untamed, promise-filled expanse of a life without ceiling, is far more frightening to a people whose identity has been shaped by limitation than the slavery they left behind. Type "I release my Egypt" in the comments right now. You know what it is. The relationship that gave you identity, even if it kept you small. The position that gave you relevance, even if it kept you performing. The version of yourself that people celebrated, even if that version was built over the ruins of your truest self. Name it in the quiet of your own spirit, and let those words be the beginning of the release. Someone is still wearing theirs, not because they have not heard the message, because the thing that kept them small also kept them known, and unknown freedom is heavier than a familiar chain. This message exists to find them when the weight becomes unbearable. Through the link in the description, or the pinned comment, a coffee, a one-time seed, or a place among those who carry this mission monthly. Not as charity, as declaration. The hand that lets go of Egypt and the hand that opens to plant. That is one hand. One act of faith completing itself. Not a general prayer, the kind you mean when honest in the quiet. The container that gave you identity but kept you performing. The version of yourself maintained for people who needed you smaller. The fear beneath it that without the familiar shape, you will not be recognized, not even by yourself. Stop holding your hands closed, gripping, defining, explaining, is the moment release has room to land. Your Egypt is not as far behind you as the silence has made it feel. What Egypt have you been mourning? What loss have you dressed up in the language of faith, calling it your promise when it was actually your limitation? Wearing a familiar face, that is a question worth sitting with in total silence, because the answer is rarely obvious. The Egypt you have been mourning rarely looks like Egypt from the inside. It looks like the relationship that gave you identity, even if it kept you small. It looks like the position that gave you relevance, even if it kept you performing for approval rather than living from purpose. It looks like the version of yourself that people celebrated, even if that version was a carefully maintained persona built over the ruins of your truest self. The Egypt you are grieving has a name, and it is a name only you and God know. And the invitation right now is to stop dressing it in the language of loss and start seeing it for what it actually was. The container that had to be broken so that what God placed inside you could no longer be contained. But let me challenge you with something, because not your sin per completely transforming, it is not even your fear. It is your agreement with a smaller version of yourself that you made peace with somewhere along the way. There was a moment, and you know exactly what I am talking about, when the vision God placed in you felt too large, too audacious, too far from where you were standing. And instead of holding the tension between who you were and who He said you would become, you quietly negotiated downward. You told yourself it was humility. You called it being realistic. You surrounded yourself with people who confirmed the smaller version because the larger one required too much from everyone around you. And then you built a life around the negotiated version and called it surrender. But it was not surrender. It was a settlement. And God is arresting the settlement right now because the settlement was never the covenant. Type "I reject the settlement" in the comments, and type 777 alongside it. 7 is the number of completion of a covenant being honored in full. You did not come this far to live in the negotiated version. You came this far because heaven refused to let the settlement be the final word on your life. Humility is one of the most misused words in the spiritual vocabulary of people who are afraid of their own calling. True humility is not the diminishment of what God placed in you. True humility is the total acknowledgement that what God placed in you did not originate with you and therefore cannot be scaled down by your opinion of your own worthiness. When you look at a gift and say, "This is too big for someone like me," you are not being humble. You are being inaccurate. You are applying your own limited assessment to something that God assessed before He formed you in the womb. You are holding a masterwork up to a dim light and calling it ordinary, because you are afraid of what it would cost to believe it is exactly what it appears to be. That is not humility. That is self-protective unbelief wearing humility's clothing. And God, who will not share His glory, will also not allow His purposes to be reduced to the size of your insecurity. The arrest is the moment He begins to dismantle the settlement and reclaim the full territory of the covenant. And here is the part you probably did not expect. The part that reframes everything you have just heard. The warning is not about what is coming against you. The warning is about what is trying to come through you, that you keep talking yourself out of. The arrest is not God stopping you. The arrest is God stopping you from stopping yourself. The enemy you have been watching for is not outside you. It has been the internal agreement that says you are too late, too broken, too ordinary, too unknown to carry what heaven has actually assigned to your life. And until that agreement is broken, not just acknowledged, not just prayed about, but completely dismantled, the breakthrough that has already been released in the Spirit will continue to wait at the threshold of your obedience. That threshold is a real place. It is not a metaphor. In the Spirit, there is a place where what God has already spoken and what you have not yet perceived are separated by nothing more than your willingness to cross from the conversation into the commitment. The breakthrough has been authorized, the resources have been allocated, The assignment has a name on it, and that name is yours. But a breakthrough that has been authorized in heaven still requires agreement on earth. It still requires a human being who is willing to stop negotiating, stop shrinking, stop explaining to God all the reasons why the timing is wrong or the vessel is insufficient, and simply say yes. A full, unqualified, irrevocable yes that moves out of the forming place and into the fullness, even when the fullness is still largely invisible. Type "My name is on the assignment" in the comments right now, not as aspiration, as agreement with what heaven already wrote. You are not claiming what belongs to someone else. You are receiving what has always been yours. Type it and let that agreement become the seal on the crossing that is beginning right now. The crossing does not begin with the water parting. It begins with the staff going up, provision met movement, and the seed you plant today is not preparation for the crossing. It is the crossing beginning. Someone is still in the place where the arrest feels like punishment, where the assignment feels written for someone who has not failed as many times as they have. This message exists to reach them through the link in the description or the pinned comment: a coffee, a single seed, or a place among those who carry this mission as their own. Heaven will not break this law when you release into someone else's crossing. What was waiting at the threshold of your own obedience is authorized to move, not a general prayer, the specific one, the assignment with your name on it that you have not said yes to out loud yet. The door you have knocked on so long your knuckles have stopped feeling it, the fear beneath the faith that the yes will cost more than the no already has. Stop holding your hands closed, calculating, negotiating. Waiting is the moment the staff goes up. Your Red Sea is not as impossible as the waiting has made it feel. This is your moment of crossing. Not because everything is perfect, not because the fear is gone, not because the path is clear, but because God has brought you to this exact message on this exact day, in this exact season. And that is not an accident. That is precision. That is the hand of the Most High reaching into your timeline and saying, now. This is where we change the trajectory. This is where the arrest becomes the activation. The crossing never happens in conditions of complete visibility. That is the nature of faith. It is always required at the edge of what you can see. The Israelites stood at the bank of the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them and nothing but water in front of them. There was no path, there was no bridge, there was no earthly reason to believe that forward was possible. But Moses lifted his staff and the waters parted. Not before the step was taken, but as the step was being taken, the miracle met the movement. The provision appeared at the border of the obedience. And what looked like an impossible ending became the most traumatic testimony of God's faithfulness in the entire history of a nation. Your Red Sea moment is not behind you. It is in front of you, and the staff in your hand is not your plan, not your reputation, not your resources. It is your willingness before you go. 3 things. Share this message right now. Not as content, as a lifeline. Someone in your life is standing at the edge of their Red Sea right now, calling the water a wall, calling the arrest a punishment, mourning an Egypt that was keeping them small. When you share this with them, you are not sending a video. You are extending the staff of God into their moment. And there is a law heaven will not break. When you bless someone else with what was placed in your hands, heaven opens the channel wider over your own life. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, not to follow a channel, to keep the sacred pipeline open. Every message placed here is prepared for the exact soul who needs it at the exact moment they need it. When you subscribe, you are not clicking a button. You are telling heaven, I want to stay in the flow of what you are releasing. I will not miss what is coming. And in the comments, type I say yes. Not to a channel, not to a message, to the crossing, to the assignment, to the fullness that has been waiting at the threshold of your willingness. Your Red Sea is in front of you. The staff is in your hand, and heaven is watching what you do next.